Good morning. I want to welcome you to this conference organized by the Levy Economics Institute, which is on the other side of the Atlantic in New York. I also want to thank the Ford Foundation and the senior officer Leonardo Rodamaki, not only for the financial support and also for his guidance to the project that the Ford Foundation is supporting at the Levy Institute on the re-regulation of financial markets and institutions. Many thanks are also due to the many media sponsors for publicizing this event, but also sincere thanks to Kronis Polychroniou, who conceived the idea of this conference, and also for his tireless efforts in working here in Athens for all the logistical details. This conference is the outcome of the Institute's project on monetary policy and financial structure, and is headed by my long-standing colleague, Jan Kregel, who has inherited this project from Herman Minsky, who had started it and initiated it in 1990 when he joined the Institute as a distinguished scholar. I'm sure that what we have seen over the recent past is the immense recognition of the contributions that Herman Minsky made, and the recognition has come not only in the United States and in Europe, but also all over the world. I'll take a few minutes to just say something about the Levy Institute. The Levy Institute was established in 1986. It is a unit of our college, which is in New York. It is independent. It is a non-partisan think tank. And it encourages the diversity of opinion and the examination of the economic issues that are pressing today, not only in the United States, but for the rest of the world. We are concerned with financial instability, the capital development of the economy, the purchasing power of workers, growth and unemployment, the distribution of income, wealth and well-being, and gender equality. Our focus is on generating viable, effective public policy responses to pressing economic problems, and we bring together academics, business leaders, policymakers, and the public to debate and at times to contest dominant ideas in the hope of serving the public interest. We invite you to take a look at the various Institute publications that are outside, and that most of them relate to the topics that will be discussed during this conference. And also we ask you to take a look at our website and perhaps join our Levy News, which incidentally averages about 500,000 page views per month. Now, the purpose of this conference is to broaden the discussion relating to the crisis in Greece and the Eurozone to a wider audience interested in understanding the root causes of the crisis from the perspective of careful research and analysis. My colleagues and I have argued as early as 2010 that the diagnosis of the crisis and the corrective actions proposed by the Troika and followed by the 3 successive governments in Greece were ill-conceived. As we hope to show tomorrow, for instance, through our specially constructed stock flow consistent macroeconomic model for Greece, the prospects for the country are not encouraging, should business continues as usual. The simulated trajectories of the financial balances of the 3 main sectors of the economy, for instance, the private, the public, and the external, for the next 3 years are very much different than those suggested by the Troika and the Greek government. We pride ourselves on our model's capacity to offer projections, at least for the United States, that are much more accurate than those of conventional models. And unfortunately, those conventional models are being used by the Troika as well. High public deficits and debt, together with bad policies, have created unsustainable and unstable markets. The ineffective and disastrous austerity policy responses, miscalculating fiscal multipliers, have made matters worse, delivering catastrophic levels of unemployment, deepening recessions, declining fortunes, and high levels of poverty and despair. Euphoric periods with accommodative monetary and fiscal policies helped increase both the government and private sector's borrowing and debt, linked to the deterioration of the balance of payments. Indeed, there is a macroeconomic identity making the internal, that is private and public sectors, with the external, the current account balance. And although this identity is not a theory, it informs policy. The importance of this identity will be analyzed with considerable detail tomorrow when we discuss again the Levy Institute model for the Greek economy and what we expect will happen in the next 3 years should the present course of austerity continues. The introduction of the euro was based on member countries' convergence of domestic inflation, represented by an inflation target, a government deficit and debt to GDP ratios, disregarding the widely different domestic economic and monetary conditions across countries. Even though convergence of the monetary variables was achieved, it came with increasing divergence of real economic performance, for instance, in productivity, labor costs, and real rates of return across member countries. And this divergence surfaced in intra-regional trade imbalances financed by increasing cross-border lending within the Eurozone. Furthermore, because of inflation and interest rate convergence, financial institutions did not recognize risk differentials across the member states. The relative risks of individual countries issuing sovereign debt that should have been dependent on the real economy of each country disappeared. Ultimately, this meant that the ability to repay debt became more and more dependent on the ability to borrow to meet interest and principal payments. This process, of course, those of you who have read and know about Minsky's work, is nothing more but a Ponzi scheme or a house of cards. As lenders came to recognize the inability of the borrower to service debt, they withdrew support, and financial instability became a financial crisis. This, of course, can be attributed to the faulty structure of the Eurozone, a topic that will be the focus of many presentations that follow. A year ago, we organized a similar conference in Berlin with the purpose of entering in a dialogue with government representatives from Germany and North European countries, the European Central Bank and the United States Federal Reserve, along with academicians and business leaders concerned with the continuing crisis, the ineffectiveness of policies dealing with the crisis in the Eurozone, and the disastrous results that have ensued in the periphery member states. It was pointed out that those who had argued that the Greek crisis exposed the profligate Greek government and its citizens, that this was contrary really to the evidence. At the onset of the crisis, Greece had one of the lowest per capita incomes in the European Union, and its social safety net was modest compared to the rest of Europe. But reading the press at the time, one was given the impression that the Greeks enjoyed one of the highest standards of living in Europe, while the frugal Germans were forced to pick up the bill. By contrast, Germany and France, to take an example, spend more than double the Greek level of social protection benefits. Even Ireland spent more on social protection than the supposedly profligate Greeks. Even if we took into account, as many had then argued, that corruption ran rampant in Greece, its administrative costs were lower than those of the German, the French, and the Irish bureaucracies. Even attending and even spending on pensions before they were decimated by now was lower than in other European countries. Since the Berlin Conference, the Eurozone sovereign debt continued to increase despite the harsh austerity imposed by Berlin and Brussels. Debt dynamics, of course, are complex, but the debt level of the South European periphery is accumulating at an accelerating rate. For instance, Greece is about 170% of GDP, thinking that when the crisis began in 2009, it was 125% of GDP. Italy is presently at about 130% of GDP, Portugal 127%, and Ireland 125%. What is clear, however, is that austerity means that falling wages and pensions reduce consumption and retail sales, and hence government revenues, necessitating higher taxes that further reduce income and output, and continuously increasing the debt to GDP ratio. For the Eurozone as a whole, public debt is at 94% of GDP, much higher than the artificial 60% of the Maastricht Treaty and the level Germany insists that it be followed. As the bigger troubled economies like Spain and Italy are also under the grip of austerity, the entire continent would ultimately see government revenues collapsing. Worse, exports to neighbors are hurt by a reduction in demand, as it has happened in Greece. Lower wages, pensions, and prices in one member country would engender competitive deflation and could compound the problem as each country tries to gain. What is most remarkable is that the EU's largest exporter, Germany, does not yet appear to recognize that its insistence on fiscal austerity for all its neighbors and promotion of the beggar thy neighbor export-led strategy can neither last very long nor will be accepted by those charged with running the global economy, as demonstrated by the recent strong voices coming from Washington. Many of us at the Levy Institute suggested early on that what was needed was a way of redirecting demand to the trade deficit nations, for example, by having surplus nations spend euros on direct investment. And such mechanisms could be set up very quickly under the aegis of European investment banks. We would recall that the great master, John Maynard Keynes, said that those surplus economies, either they use their surpluses or they lose them. Effective incentives to recycle current account surpluses via foreign direct investment, equity flows, foreign aid, or imports could easily be crafted. These suggestions have fallen, of course, on deaf ears in both Berlin and in Brussels. As we again will show tomorrow, the strategy of internal devaluation that has by now achieved a 30% reduction in Greece, surpassing the goal of 15%, has proved to be detrimental for living standards and domestic consumption, the most important stabilizing driver of an economy. For Greece, the path of exports, as the evidence shows, was unsustainable before the crisis, and it is still unstable, despite the modest increase that is not sufficient to offset the precipitous decline of private and public consumption. To be sure, exports are important, but domestic demand is crucial. Even China, the largest export-oriented economy, after the global collapse of exports, took the necessary steps to increase and stabilize its domestic demand. And this should be the emphasis for Greece and the other countries of the European South. The government has begun celebrating from now that the primary budget surplus should be achieved this year, and is on a media campaign to convince the Greek citizens of the importance of this milestone. And even if this primary surplus were real, without the use of creative accounting, one should ask, what was the cost of accomplishing it? I hear frequently the word ατύχημα, but I am not certain what it means. Does it mean that the government might be unable to convince Berlin and Brussels that no additional austerity measures can be implemented to cover the 2014 projected budget gap? Or does it mean that the projected revenues and/or spending cuts fall short of the targets? In my view, a responsible government cannot be guided by happenstance. What is to be done then? The South European nations, and especially Greece, all of us know, need a pro-growth and employment policy. As we will show again tomorrow, there are ways that these goals can be achieved. All of what I have said up to now is drawn from the work of Hyman Minsky and Wayne Godley, both distinguished scholars at the Institute, for many years. Hyman Minsky, of course, is known for developing the financial instability hypothesis and documenting the important role of a big government and a big bank. While Wayne Godley was a master forecaster and the architect of macroeconomic stock flow consistent models that simulate the trajectories of the three main sectors that I referred to earlier with peerless accuracy. This conference, therefore, is in a way a tribute to their contributions to economics and to us. Finally, it is our sincere hope that this conference will present a true picture of the crisis in the Eurozone and in Greece and the experiences of austerity, and in a way provide new ideas for an exit from this crisis in contrast to the strategies that are in place now. Thank you very much for coming, and enjoy the conference.